Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm glad you're here. Beautiful day. Trying to enjoy it because before we know it, it's going to be fall. School starts next week for a lot of kids in our area. It's kind of crazy. So I'm enjoying the weather while I can before it turns. It's kind of short out in this part of the world. So I'm Rita Hickman, body-mind expert, shiatsu massage therapist, and I help women in toxic and narcissistic relationships. And one of the ways that I do that is these live streams every morning. You know, I bring up topics which are relevant to my clients, relevant to the world at large, and that I've worked through myself. Because as most of my clients say, they know that I've done my own work, which means that I tend to be right on target when it comes to helping other women through this. So one of the things we're talking about today are the long-term effects of narcissist trauma. So as we've said before, trauma is something that happens to you that you feel out of control, it's unexpected, and you don't or weren't given an opportunity to process through it or reframe it. Something becomes trauma when when the process isn't finished. Now, does that sound like anybody you know? It sounds like a lot of women, and that's kind of the topic of today. You know, when we sit there and look at narcissism, well, let me start with children. Okay, so, you know, a lot of children, parents look at their children and they say, how did they get like this? How did they get so bad? How did they end up this way? And the parents are usually conveniently blind to that the children are the next generation of the lineage that's being passed down. And because of our changing world, and because we're not getting the tools and the skills we need, and because healing was never a priority, or hasn't been a priority in our culture for a long time, our children and young adults are coming out as magnified versions of the wounds which have been passed down from generation to generation to generation. You know, when we start looking at narcissism, we have to start breaking the secrets. And the secret that most women have is they think it's only happening to them. But in reality, narcissism in its latest iteration is simply the most magnified effect of narcissism that's been around for a very, very, very long time, especially towards women. You know, and women's temperament and men's temperament. Doesn't really matter the reason. Is it that men and women are different? You know, women are more empathic and think of the big picture, and men, you know, are more testosterone based and they want to duke it out. You know, I don't know. You know, it started, this line of thinking started when I was talking to my psychologist, and she was talking about coaches, about how men's athletics and women's athletics are different. And men's athletics, she said, they just punch each other out and then go have a beer because they're best friends. Women, however, it ends up, you know, festering, and there ends up being, you know, talk behind each other's backs and passive aggressiveness and all sorts of stuff. But what triggered in me, or what came up in me actually, was the thought that, yeah, but if men punched women in the face when they were angry, that would be called domestic violence. That's unacceptable. So most men, in their wiring or cultural wiring, which has been acceptable and okay for a long time, is that you handle your issues, your emotions, your conflicts with some sort of emotional or physical violence. And that, in my mind, where you impose violence upon someone who is smaller or weaker or emotionally more vulnerable, or a child, is a form of narcissism, because you don't care what the effect is going to be on anybody else. You don't care that it will hurt someone else. So these ways of dealing with our emotions and the traumas of having to somehow just cope with it has been passed down from parent to child to parent to child. And we look around, and many women who are in narcissistic relationships, there's an emotional isolation. You think that you're the only one that's going through this. You're the only one that, and it's shameful. because you don't know anybody else who's going through this. And the reality is most women on some level are being victimized by narcissists. And whether it's on a global, a nationwide scale, whether it's on a community scale, it's still happening. And that trauma, similar to trauma of the Holocaust, similar to the trauma of slavery, it's a generational trauma that gets passed down generation to generation. Violence and narcissism towards women has just become the status quo. And it's only because we've started to say, enough, this has really gotten enough. This needs to stop. And then women dealing with the backlashes of trying to create change. So, on the big scale, narcissism affects us for generations and generations. And it affects whole communities and whole societies. And the reason it hasn't been dealt with is because we've kept it secret. Because we haven't talked about it. And we've sat there in shame or judged other women or belittled or minimized them in some way. And not had the respect and care and compassion for this crazy dynamic. As I said, it can be caused by mental health. Maybe it's the cause between the difference between men and women. Maybe it's, specific traumas that were passed down. But either way, these traumas were passed down. Now, what does it look like besides, not just on a global scale? What does it look like on a personal scale to the self? Well, first of all, it means that your relationships with your family probably weren't the greatest. Because there were all those traumatic wounds that one or the other of your parent was probably dealing with, and they dealt with it in their own very narcissistic way. That was the pattern. You deal with narcissism by being a narcissist. You deal with, your feelings by getting angry about them. I had a great mentor who would say, one of the biggest challenges is that women are trying to become more like men. We're trying to deal with our emotions in the way that men deal with emotions because it's the only way that seems to communicate in the situation. And that's true sometimes one-on-one, and it can look like being concerned about your well-being can look like narcissism. It can look like abuse of some way. And it's trauma that's coming forth and expressing itself and looking to be healed. Our problem isn't between men and women. Our problem is that we never learned how to navigate our emotions in a way that didn't result in trauma, that didn't create a lifetime of nervous system reactions or fight or flight or being triggered by things or a lifetime of chronic health issues. Chronic immune system disorders, headaches, digestive issues. These things are more common than we're led to believe, than we understand, because it hasn't been in the spotlight. And the people who have suffered because of this, physically, mentally, or emotionally, are vilified. They're re-victimized by society as weak, as not enough. And these beliefs that they carry that were imprinted on them from generation to generation to generation about what women should be like, what a good woman looks like. These things, they end up evolving into long-term physical issues, or even in a family, changes in the genes. They've proven after the Holocaust that children born to parents who were in the Holocaust or in concentration camps, their DNA had changed from one generation to the next because of the trauma. So imagine these traumas piling up over and over, generation to generation, and this is where we're at in a society that has very few relationship or social skills, and who tends to be victimized the easiest in any relationship. It typically is the woman. It's typically the one who looks beyond the immediate reaction, who doesn't punch somebody in the face to deal with their emotions, and to end up being the one punched in the face. Not because somebody's a bad person, but because they too don't know how to handle their emotions. They don't know how to do it. So there is a way out of this, actually. You're not stuck. you're stuck in the process. You're stuck in the traumas. The traumas keep you stuck in spinning around in emotional reactions and in a state of fight or flight, causing, inflammation, causing mental health challenges and depression and anxiety and a felt sense of being really uncomfortable and triggers. So how do you find your way out? You finish the process. One of the most healing things for my body has been when I started to do my trauma processing work. When I created a safe space for myself internally and externally, I found safe people. I got a good foundation in place of healthy habits, of new ideas, and I gave myself permission to finally feel the things that could go back generations. You can do generational work around this. Compassion for your grandmother and your grandmother's grandmother and your grandmother's grandmother's grandmother. Going back and seeing how this is a pattern, not just that started with you, which you might be carrying the guilt and shame about because it's been kept under wraps, but realizing that these patterns of fear, these patterns of not knowing how to handle how we feel, little pink pills and suppressing and war and violence, and passing down narcissist wounds from mother to child. This stuff is not new. And we have to go back. Even after you've worked on your personal wounds and you start working on your generational wounds, you start to realize that there is a collective consciousness of women who have been suffering from all over the world for decades and decades and decades. And you start to feel the weight of realizing that this wasn't just a one-off. You just weren't victimized because there was something wrong with you. That this has been a pattern of reality. And it's a pattern of reality for women around the world, daily. And so we have to start recognizing and realizing that the burden and the weight we carry isn't because there's something wrong with us, isn't because we're broken, isn't because we screwed up or it's our fault. This is an epidemic that's been around, an epidemic of people who feel so overwhelmed by their own emotions and so helpless to them and so out of control with them that they have no ability to think about anyone but the pain and the suffering and the thoughts and the issues that they're in. No ability. And you, my friend, were collateral damage. There wasn't anything about you or anything wrong. You were taught to be a good woman like almost all women were taught to be. And when we start asking this question, let's say about sexual violence or sexual discrimination, it's happening everywhere. Just people don't talk about it. It's happening everywhere. In almost every household on some level, even in the most amazing, wonderful relationships. There's a level of it, just because it's so ingrained, it's so acculturated into us about women taking care of the needs of other people to the detriment of their own health and well-being. It's a common theme. You're not alone. So if you find that you aren't where you want to be, you've got chronic health issues, maybe it's starting to turn into something more serious. Maybe it's starting to affect even more the things that matter to you. Maybe you're getting older and your body can't handle that level of stress anymore and it's starting to break down. Maybe you just can't get your breath. You can't stop being tired. Maybe you don't get along with the people that you wish you could get along with. Maybe you're not happy in your job. All of these are probably side effects of narcissism that's been handed down. And until we start to deal with the trauma, the physical trauma that's stored in our body, and it's not because we've had physical trauma externally, it's because internally we have felt physical trauma. Emotional trauma is physical trauma because emotions have a physical component. They're not just fuzzy-wuzzy up here. They're chemicals and nervous system reactions. They're your immune system and then your digestive system. They're everything interconnected. So even if you didn't have violence, physical violence, if you had emotional violence, it caused a physical effect in your body. And that physical effect, your body can only handle so much before it starts to break down, before it starts to turn into something else. So there are ways to release this trauma, and I've talked about it a ton of times, of giving yourself that safe space, letting yourself revisit these things in a safe, loving, compassionate way, either with compassionate people or being the compassionate person yourself, and giving yourself the tools to manage it so you don't get lost, so you can do it in little bits and bites. I do work on this every morning. Every morning I work on another little piece. This morning I was working on, as you can tell from my talk, the communal violence of generations of narcissism on women. That's been on my mind, you know? And so when we start cleaning these things up, when we start getting on the right track, and I like to say there are 5 pillars that you work on, and when you work on those 5 pillars, you become healthier, happier, and you start looking for ways to change the communal consciousness of narcissism, so that we can create a better world, not just for us, but for all the people that we care about, even the narcissists, because the narcissists have been victimized too, which is why they're narcissists. And unfortunately, because they're stronger or smarter or wiser or, I don't know, older or bigger, or I don't know what the reasons are, those who are smaller and weaker, like children, you know, or women who are sensitive or have a sensitive nervous system, they end up being victimized by someone else trying to deal with their own trauma. And it's not right, and it's not fair, and it also means that we women who have been victimized by this stuff, we're the only ones who can really save us, because we're the ones who've hit bottom. We're the ones who know this cannot continue, not just personally, but also on a community level and on a worldwide level. We have to start to shift the thinking. We have to start learning the tools how to release these emotions and finish the process of the trauma, so that they stop, so old traumas stop having such a strong impact on your physical and your mental and your emotional health and your relationships and your environment and the people that you love. So it's up to us to start to become healers of ourselves and then healers of the people that we care about. Because if we don't, it's not going to change. So you're the one, and it's whether you accept the call or not. And if you're not ready, that's okay. But if you do want to start healing yourself, give me a call. There's a couple different resources we've got. I do strategic calls that come up with a good master plan. Doesn't matter whether you coach with me or not. It's, you know, it's not dependent upon time or finances. We figure something out that works for you. Or I've partnered with the Narcissist book, or we have a very affordable, I think it's $147 for 8 weeks, something like that. Coaching mastermind, just for women who are dealing with narcissism. So if you feel stuck, those are 3 ways that we can start to get you unstuck, because you don't have to be here, and you're definitely not alone, and there's a way out. You don't have to be stuck. There is a way out. And when you work the system works. Okay? So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And what I'd like you to do today, what should we do today? Today I want you to think about, just for even 5 or 10 minutes, the lineage or the history or the heritage of narcissism in our world. And it comes across in domestic violence, sexual violence, emotional violence. It comes across when we have to take so many pharmaceuticals in order to just survive this world that we live in. You know, it comes from us hearing about, you know, terrorism, and hearing about people who impose their wounds onto others, and the others end up being collateral damage because nobody knows how to deal with their feelings in a healthy way. And it's time that we started to learn. Okay, so I hope you have a great day, and remember, you're part of a much bigger picture, and you're not alone, and you shouldn't be ashamed, because this is a pretty big epidemic. So take a little bit of time and think about that, and realize that change is critical, not just for you, but for the world at large. And the faster you do this, and the faster that, we start to teach these things and heal this stuff, then we can make a bigger impact on the world. Okay? Because we got to change. The world has got to make a change. And it has to start with us. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.